Everyone ready?
This is the SEC Insider Hit. Presented by your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. Go local. Go with a home team.
He is Mike Detillier, LSU Insider, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. The show is brought to you by SoundcomAV.com, the absolute leader in top audio and visual AV in the Southeast, Sound and Communications. Mike Detillier joins us on the Yuengling Lager guest line. This is Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. Maybe we shouldn't have been surprised. New coach, new QB, knew a lot going on against a Florida State team that played better at the end of the year last year and has had their coach for a longer period of time. But a disappointing loss for the LSU Tigers as they gave FSU every opportunity to win, and they eventually did. Mike D., what was your one big takeaway from the LSU loss on Sunday night?
I don't know if it was one, but LSU seemed to be a very tight football team. It was funny, Brian sort of was critical of how LSU started last year and said that they looked like a tired football team and a bit distracted. Well, yeah, it was days after Hurricane Ida had just hit, but they seem to be a tight football team, and sometimes that does happen. They seem to be much more concerned about not making a mistake than go and make a play. And they didn't play well for three quarters. They really didn't. And then all of a sudden it kicked in. I was impressed with Jaden Daniels. I thought he played a good football game. He was under a lot of heat. And he got out of there quick, and he had to. But, offensive line play was no surprise. I didn't think they played well. But the lack of big plays offensively. And Keyshawn Butte had a couple of shots, to put points on the board and didn't make the play. He can kind of sulk about it, but, he was part of it. He had a play in the end zone that he didn't make the catch. And then he had a pass hit him sort of bad right in the numbers. And he didn't turn around to see where the ball was. So it was disappointing on that end because he's the best player they have out on the field. Defensively, they didn't tackle well. And that, for game one, you see that a lot. But their special teams was a disaster. Malik Neighbors, who had... If there was an MVP of the fall camp, it was Malik. He was tremendous as a receiver and a return man, and he muffs two turnovers on that. And then I keep hearing people talk about their kicker. It wasn't the kicker's fault. You got a block up front. You could have had Cade York in there. You're not getting the ball off the ground with that much leakage. And a blocked field goal and a blocked extra point. And as bad as all that was, this team had a shot to take it into overtime, as bad as they played. So I don't know if that tells you that Florida State's defense isn't too hot, because when you give up that much yardage and that many points in the fourth quarter, you sort of worry about that. But, man, that was a lot of things that went wrong for LSU. That was almost dominoed. They didn't have much of a running game other than Daniels. And, again, the big play element in the passing game with Butte was not there. And he seemed to sulk about it. And, hey, listen, snap out of it. Hey, you got a lot more games to play. So it was disappointing because I think Florida State is nothing more than an above-average team, which tells you basically where LSU's at this stage.
You can run the numbers a couple of different ways, depending on what lens you want to look through. That they can clean up that stuff somewhat fairly easy, right? I mean, muff punts and
Other than offensive line issues, I think you can do better, certainly on the special teams part, because it wasn't the kicker. It was blocking up front. And Florida State saw that apparently because on the blocked field goal, they attacked LSU on the left side. And LSU made a change on extra point they brought in Mason Taylor, who I thought had a really good game catching the football. And Emory Jones, a true freshman also, and they whiffed on the block. So, hey, listen, you got to block. It's like an accordion when you're blocking for a field goal and extra point. And they sort of whiffed. So that can get better. I think you've seen the last probably of Malik Neighbors running back punts. But he's a big play guy. I think it will really help him in the pitch and catch part of the game. So that part you can get better. I think you always get better as a tackling team because that's something in practice really you don't get a lot of work on or very little to nothing today. I mean, it's different. You try to explain that to people. They don't tackle live, okay, in practice. It's a different world. And I know for most defensive coaches, we had Pete Jenkins on last night, and he was saying, that's the big thing today that you worry about, of angles to get to the ball carrier and wrapping up, that sort of thing happens so much. And he said, you can simulate it all you want. It's nothing like playing in a real game. So that part I think you can get better. Butte, certainly, he's a star player, but he was not engaged like I've seen him before in a game, and then sort of pouted a little bit. So that can get better. LSU's offensive line, especially on the right side, got caved in by Florida State, and that was a concern going into the game and going out of the game too. That has got to get better up front. And you're starting a center who's never played center before. Never. He's never played center. I spoke to him. He didn't play it in high school, didn't play it last year. He was a guard tackle. He dribbled a couple of them in practice and got an earful, but you can't sail it. You're inside the 5-yard line, and he sailed one over the top of Jaden Daniels. So you hope that can get better. But I think that's going to be an issue for LSU as the season goes along, how much better it can get up front, because Florida State ain't Alabama or Texas A&M. No. I mean, that's all I know up front. Right. They're not close to those teams as far as talent's concerned. So it's got to be a little bit concerning for both teams, to be honest. Who the hell made those defensive calls in the fourth quarter for Florida State to let LSU get back in the game?
Yeah.
Because they had no pulse as an offensive team until very late in the third quarter. Nothing.
Mike Detillier on the Yuengling Lager guest line talking LSU Florida State. What if this running game takes a while and it's only Jaden Daniels running around? Let's say it takes 5, 6, 7 weeks, Mike, because of what you're describing with the offensive line, which makes it just basically the Jaden Daniels show. What does that look like if it does take that long?
Some really difficult games when you're going to play Mississippi State and Auburn, and those teams. You got to be able to run the football. And last year, it took them a couple of weeks to get it cranked up too. They're almost the exact same thing. So that's Brian Kelly's wheelhouse. Is along the offensive line. And I've never heard a coach since Nick Saban talk about special teams the way Brian did. And it wasn't just sort of lip service. He spoke a lot about it, and yet that was a complete disaster for LSU. So can you get better with it? Yeah, and I think it certainly will get better, but it was concerning to see. And not that I think any of us thought that this team was going to challenge anyone in the SEC West, but I would have thought this was an 8-win football team, and part of those 8 wins for me was the W against Florida State. Because again, I think they're an above average team in college football, but they know great shakes, and so that tells you something about LSU.
Let's go to what Georgia did to Oregon.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, Mike, good grief. I thought Georgia would cover, but I didn't think it would be 49-3 and Oregon would look like a D3 school. How about them Georgia Bulldogs?
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to what we had calling Coach Jenkins last night, and he worked with them in the summer, and I had told him during the summer when he had his Louisiana line camp here, they can't be better on defense. And he took a look at me and said, Mike, if it's a drop, it ain't going to be much. I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me. And he's like, I'm just telling you. He said, it's a drop-off because they don't have as much experience. But he said, man, talent, they got it. And you saw it on display. Despite losing everything they lost on defense, they're an impressive football team. Now, I always thought, other than that running back, they may be better on offense. Because last year they could haul out kind of an array of running backs. But Stetson Bennett, again, shows up. And I wasn't a huge fan of his a year ago. I sort of wondered how far they could go with him. And he showed me how far. He won a national championship with that team. But he's just such a confident young man. He's not, an NFL prospect as a player or anything like that. But, man, he's a really good college quarterback who's smart. He knows where to go with the football. He's a great leader. He's got command of the huddle. And so, man, you got to give Kirby a lot of credit there. Their receiving core is better than it was a year ago. Their offensive line play is really good, and they got huge guys up front. Can they run the football as well as they did a year ago? Because last year, we all saw, it was running back by committee, and all those guys all sort of looked the same. I mean, they hit you every which way. They got some young backs that have to come through for them, but they're a very talented football team, and the drop-off defensively is not as steep, I think, as any of us would have thought. The only guy that thought that it would be close was Jenkins, because he told me this back in May and June after he had worked with the Georgia defensive front, that it ain't going to be much of one. Man, and they got some athletes. They got some athletes in that front seven that's impressive of how they can run the field and how well they tackle. Done a great job of, I guess, the old Nick Saban line, because I did so many junkets with Nick when he was here. He would always talk about recruit and develop, R&D. That everywhere you went with him, it was the same speech about, we want to recruit and develop players. And Kirby's done a really good job. Really good job, almost ripping that script right out of Saban's book.
It's so early, Mike, but Georgia and Alabama dominated. And I know Bama didn't play anybody, and Georgia, we thought, played a team that had recruited in the top 10 or 12 the last few years under Cristobal. Ohio State did actually play somebody, and it wasn't what we thought they would look like on offense. Did you see another team that you thought could challenge outside of Bama and Georgia this weekend?
No. I thought Ohio State defensively played well and kept them in the game until their offense sort of started to click. They seem to be similar to LSU in offense, a little bit tight and almost trying to find an identity of what to do until a little bit later on in the second half. But I can't put them in a category of Alabama and Georgia at this stage. And, they got some people out west that want to do that with SC, but come on, they defensively, they can't play football defensively with the likes of a Georgia and an Alabama. Now, they can put points on the board now, but, that's not a surprise because of Lincoln Riley. The team I'd like to see a little bit more is Oklahoma with Brent Venables. I'd like to see them a little bit more. They played better than I thought they would. I'll be honest with you. I thought Brent did a really good job getting his team ready, and they were prepared. They tackled well, and they got some speed across the board. So they were a little bit more impressive than I thought. The game I'm interested to watch this week, though, is, and I got so many people ask me about it, because for Manning, the two guys that stood out for me were Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. Those guys were sort of a cut above. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Bryce Young. He is who he is. And he was Fran Tarkenton. That was Archie Manning's line. Doesn't he look like Fran Tarkenton to you? Now, if you didn't watch Fran play, just Google his name and you'll find out a lot about him. And I think Archie's pretty close there, the type player Bryce is. But Will Levis and Anthony Richardson put on a show at Manning from Thursday all the way to Sunday morning. Throwing the football. And Anthony Richardson, what he did for that Florida program, to have Utah come in here, an experienced team, 14 starters, and they go to Gainesville, and they're a tough physical team. And Anthony Richardson bailed them out. Time after time, Richardson made plays to keep them in the ball game and then eventually win it. And Will Levis, I had a long talk with him at Manning, and we sort of connected pretty well there. He told me a lot of different things about what happened at Penn State, and I think they wanted their vision of him may have been an offensive version of Taysom Hill, of that he would be the running quarterback, short yardage, that sort of thing. He's a lot more than that. And you watch him throw the football, he's got some zip on it, and he's smart. He knows where to go with the football, and he could challenge to be maybe the first overall pick in the draft if everything works out. He's that good. And Richardson, if you didn't think he could play, you were mistaken. Because the one thing about Manning, I always like to watch what the campers think of a quarterback. I think it's always sort of interesting to me. And the 1,200 kids, the Friday night for Air It Out, where the college quarterbacks throw, most of the oohs and ahs were about Anthony Richardson. He put on a show where you didn't just see the ball come out of his hands, you could almost hear it. He had some velocity in those throws. Okay, and it takes a lot to impress 1,200 kids. From 15 to 18 years old, those kids, they think they're the greatest thing that ever walked on a football field, most of them. And they watched Anthony Richardson do some things with a football that they could just dream of. He put on a show that night, and man, it came out of that hand almost like a bullet coming out of a gun. And he was accurate, and so was Will Levis. And Kentucky's defense is pretty good. I know they're fighting some injuries right now, but man, that's an intriguing game for me to see those two gunslingers go after one another.
Well, yeah, I thought Anthony Richardson was fantastic. So Kentucky and Florida and South Carolina and Arkansas really have, I think, the sizzle in conference this week.
Man, listen, you don't have a heartbeat if you don't think a lot of Sam Pittman as a coach, because he's what, if you were sort of envision a coach like, that's Sam. I've known him for a long time. No offensive line coach, and he recruited this area. But he's the type of guy that you would want to play for. He's a tough, hard-nosed coach. He will not accept you not playing hard. And Arkansas doesn't have the athletes of an Alabama or a Georgia. And, man, they're competitive. And you think about Cincinnati with a returning front five along the offensive line. And a lot of people back. Now, they lost some, but they returned a lot. You watch that game. Cincinnati made one error after another, and they were sort of like LSU. They were a bit of a cluster on special teams. And that happens early in the season, but we see it every year, that teams for whatever reason, and you get it, there's a lot of new combinations, but man, there was a lot of things that went wrong technically for Cincinnati. And Luke Fickell's a good coach, really a good coach. And Arkansas played him and ended up with a W there. That's a tough game to start the season with against a Cincinnati. But man, Sam, he's just a really, really good coach. And man, what you got going on at South Carolina? They got off to a bit of a slow start, but they were able to piece it together. And you saw a little bit of, man, I closed my eyes and it was beamer ball, block kicks. Man, turned the tide for them. Just like Frank did all those years at Virginia Tech. And there were a lot of people around the SEC, and I don't know if they would want to admit it today, that didn't think it was a good hire at South Carolina with Shane. But I'd known him a little bit. I can't say I know him a lot, but I knew him a little bit. I thought he sort of had the it factor with him. Those kids play hard for him.
They do.
They really, really do. They play hard, and boy, he's got the ultimate gunslinger. He got the
He's not accurate enough. He's just
he's not, but there is something about him to make a big. He's a winner. He finds a way, despite maybe sometimes how he plays. He finds a way to dig it out. He was the one guy at Manning that got the Bronx cheers more than anybody. He really did. They're in this contest, and he's overthrowing this cart that's running around the field to kind of test your accuracy. And he was bad that night. He really was. And the kids were giving him the business. But the final deal at Manning is to take a football and from 40 yards to throw it through the hoop of a basketball goal. He comes up to make a throw in his first one. Man, he sails it right over the top of the goal. And no one gets it, though. That was close. Some of them hit the rim. Some of them hit around it. On his second throw, Bo, he got one that was like a basketball three-point shot from 60 feet out. And it nothing but net. He threw his arms up, and he got sort of the Bronx cheer from the 1,200 young men that were there. And he was loving it, almost as though, hey, listen, bring it on. You can boo me all you want. But I left out of, well, he won a 1 year's worth of Raising Cane's chicken for doing that. But it was like, his reaction to it was, man, you can boo me all you want. I could care less. And they got after him pretty good. Because one thing with kids, they sort of know how to get under your skin a little bit.
Sure.
No, if you got kids and grandkids, man, they after you pretty good. But he hung in there, and he sunk one, and I'm telling you, no one else did it.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Mike Detillier, WWL-TV Radio New Orleans. He joined us on the Yuengling Lager guest line. Thanks, Mike D. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, Bo. Appreciate it, bud.
Next week, we'll talk LSU and Mississippi State and Saints. Interesting. I want to see more Will Levis. I'll say this. Will Rogers is better than Will Levis. He's just 6 feet, 200 pounds. And Levis is 6'3", 232 pounds. I don't know if Levis and Spencer Rattler are accurate enough, but we'll see. The Out of Bounds Show is brought to you by the audio and visual experts, Sound and Communications, soundcomav.com.